Merhabalar herkese. Bugünkü sohbetimizde Doktor Raja Selvam'la beraberiz. Kendisi İntegral Somatik Psikoloji Yaklaşım'ının kurucusu. Aynı zamanda klinik psikoloji alanında doktora sahibi. Uzun yıllar olan çalışmalarının neticesinde geliştirdiği bir yaklaşım Raja Selvam'ın. ISP diyoruz, İntegral Somatik Yaklaşım. Bu yaklaşım duygularla çalışmaya odaklı. Duyguların bedende nasıl yer bulacağı ve bunun işlenmesiyle birçok terapide nasıl daha iyi sonuç alınabileceğine dair çok yakında hocamızın bir kitabı da çıktı. Ondan da bahsediyor olacağız. Türkiye'de bu eğitimi birkaç yıl önce bir defa yaptık. Bu Haziran'da tekrar başlayacak. 3 modülden oluşan bir eğitimi var hocamızın. Onunla alakalı da bilgilere daha sonra ulaşabilirsiniz. Bu sohbeti İngilizce yapacağız. Altına subtitle, altyazı koymayı planlıyoruz. Videoyu izlerken bunu görüyor olacaksınız. Good evening, Raja. Welcome.
Good evening.
Nice to see you.
Good evening. Good evening, İlknur. Good evening, Didem.
I welcome to this discussion. All psychologists in Turkey are wondering about integral somatic psychology. So we invited you to this discussion. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah.
Yeah, and we can start with basically what is the focus of integral somatic psychology and what scientific evidence is there for its effectiveness.
Yeah. The focus of integral somatic psychology, or ISP, is emotion and its embodiment. That is the core clinical strategy in integral somatic psychology. And the reason it is the focus is as follows. When we can embody an emotion, that is, when we can expand the experience of the emotion to as much of the brain and body physiology as possible, it turns out that it makes many things better. For example, it makes it possible for people to develop a greater capacity for emotional experiences, especially unpleasant emotional experiences. That, in turn, enables the easier resolution of emotional issues. For example, somebody who's stuck in grief. I just read yesterday that in the DSM, they have introduced a new diagnostic disorder called prolonged grief, grief that persists over a year, over 12 months. So when an emotion is stuck, it's stuck because the person doesn't quite have the capacity to process it, to tolerate it, to bring it to consciousness and process it through. But when we can expand the emotional experience throughout the brain and body physiology, it turns out that it makes it more bearable. And I will explain this a little later, how it happens in a very simple way. Then somebody who has had a heartbreak, who's grieving, can get to a point where they can hold the grief and have a sense that they can manage it and actually live through it. And if it were to happen again, they can live through it again. So the emotional resolution is better, when you're able to embody the emotion, which again is the expanding the emotional experience to as much of the brain and body physiology as possible, not completely, as much as possible relative to where the client is in relation to their embodiment of the emotion. And the other benefits that accrue, that's what is exciting about it, is that because we know from the latest scientific evidence that the body also is very important for cognition. All aspects of cognition are also driven by the body as much as they're driven by the brain, if not more by the body than by the brain. Behavior, the ability to express oneself, to do something, is obviously a function of the body. It has to be executed through the body. It turns out that both of them require the open availability of the body. Now, when there's an emotional experience and we cannot tolerate it, we end up shutting the body down through defenses like constriction, yeah, or dissociation. When that happens, the brain and body physiology become less available for the important functions of cognition and behavior. There is a scientific study, not just one study, that shows that if we take the emotion from the brain into the body, let's say the face and the throat area or the body area, then the brain's ability to process that emotion, its context, that is, its meanings, and is much better than when the emotion is not allowed to descend into the body and be inhabited in the body. So that's the idea. That's the idea that, you know, when we can expand the emotional experience throughout the body, we create a greater capacity for the emotion, but also make the body more available for cognition and behavior. And so there I explained at great length how to go about it step by step. I wrote the book so that it's not only a resource for therapists, because the method itself lends itself to being used as a complementary modality in all therapeutic modalities, right? If embodiment of emotions can improve all these outcomes, different therapies, you work with different modalities like cognition and behavior, and or archetypal energies or energy work. So there is a possibility of improving, you know, through integral somatic psychology, specifically the practice of embodying emotions, how it improve all these outcomes. What are the outcomes people are interested in? And of the ones I mentioned, to improve them, you know, by using it as a complementary modality, psychoanalysis or Jungian psychology, you know, body work, body psychotherapy systems, and so on. Yeah, so.
Yeah, different psychologists from different schools keep asking if they, for example, psychoanalysts, they join and benefit from ISP, or existential psychotherapists, or cognitive behavioral psychologists. Can they all benefit from ISP, and how?
Yeah, as I said, you know, the ISP, the practice of embodying emotions, is independent of modality. All that it says is that, listen, emotions are important. We now know, for example, the latest scientific findings in neuroscience, affective neuroscience, and cognitive neuroscience tell us that it's emotion at every second that determines the cognitive orientation and in turn the behavioral orientation possibilities. And that is becoming very established. And the three cannot be separated from each other, and emotion is at the center of center in terms of influence of cognition and behavior, right? So the different modalities, they can work with cognition, are they working with emotion, are they working with behavior, etc. They can adapt it, because all that the practice of embodying emotion says is that if you embody the emotional experience in a particular situation, right, all these possibilities are improved. So psychoanalysts, for example, working with, they work with affect, they work with meaning, right? Where some schools work more with meaning than with affect, but they always end up working with affect. And the core of psychoanalytic thinking is to increase affect tolerance. How do you increase affect tolerance? Through the practice of embodying emotions. You can't improve affect tolerance very quickly. And then on top of it, that improves the cognitive insights in a real way. So it's very complementary to psychoanalytic schools. You know, it's also, it's also complementary to behavioral therapy or cognitive therapy, because they're going for better behavioral outcomes and better cognitive outcomes. So we're saying, if you take a moment to do the practice of embodying emotions, you will find that the cognitive work you do and the behavioral work you do will be much better. Yeah. For example, exposure therapy, the idea of exposing people to stimuli, disturbing stimuli repeatedly to desensitize them to the stimulus based on classical conditioning. It's difficult for some people, very difficult for some people. They cannot tolerate the affect involved. And the practice of embodying emotions for those clients can be very beneficial. So you can stay within the framework of exposure therapy and create a greater capacity for the emotions involved that people sometimes find very hard to stay with in exposure therapy.
It's very exciting how it can be added to all these modalities and how it will improve the outcomes for the therapist and the client. We're really excited about it. And I have a question about, we have another modality, somatic experiencing. We have some practitioners also trying to find out how this is complementing maybe to somatic experiencing, or what are the differences, so to say.
Yeah, it can improve outcomes in every modality, and that includes somatic experiencing. What are the goals of somatic experiencing therapy? What the goals are to downregulate the brain and body physiology, especially the autonomic nervous system physiology that's disturbed by trauma. The core theory is that, the autonomic nervous system is in a state of heightened activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So the therapy is about bringing the autonomic nervous system state down to rest, and with the idea that that will improve all the other outcomes, like cognitive outcomes, emotional outcomes, behavioral outcomes. It is true, when the physiology is disturbed to a certain extent, then it's not available. It's dysregulated stress. It's not available for human experiences as much. So that's what somatic experiencing does. Now, ISP focuses only on emotion, right? And the body. That's a key difference. And it's focused on building capacity for emotions. It does not spend that much time, for example, on tracking body sensations, which is a tool that's used very effectively in somatic experiencing and some other modalities like mindfulness-based stress reduction and Vipassana and so on. Here, so we focus on emotion, right? In the least, when somatic experiencing practitioners, when they find themselves face-to-face with an emotion, then if they were to take the time out to use the practice of embodying emotions, as opposed to just tracking body sensations back and forth with emotions, they will find that their outcomes are much better. Different things, for example, bringing the person out of the freeze. Why are people in the freeze? People are in the freeze because they're terrified of something, right? If you work with the emotion of fear and develop a capacity for it, they don't have to be in the freeze as long. Yeah. So the intense emotions of trauma, complex trauma, is characterized by what? Repetitive traumatization of an interpersonal nature, and they're characterized by intense emotions. Complex trauma is characterized by intense emotions. So you cannot just work to regulate the autonomic nervous system down in the hope that it would improve emotional outcomes. Yeah, and it does, definitely it does. Otherwise, somatic experiencing wouldn't be as successful as it is. However, at the same time, the work with intense emotions involves building a greater relational capacity for it, and that might not happen in just trying to track emotions and sensations in order to regulate the emotions. It works, it's done in somatic experiencing, it's done in Vipassana, it's done in mindfulness-based stress reduction. But there's a limit to which that can be effective. And here, by adding this extra practice, somatic experience practitioners can work much better with intense emotions of complex trauma, or emotions in general, whenever they encounter it in therapy, etc. So,
Thank you. Raja, I know you're teaching it in very many countries, your approach, and just curious, like, how many countries are you at, and do you know more or less how many people you have already trained?
I think the last time we counted, we were teaching in about 18 countries. ISP has been taught in nearly 20 countries. Yeah, it has been taught on every continent. Yeah, We have probably trained as many as in the workshops and the trainings, probably about 7,500 people, we estimate. Yeah. So.
Wow, that's really just starting to pick up, I think, because now is your book coming out, and we are very excited about it. Is there a story about it? Like, how did you come up to do it, or what would you like to share with us about your book?
The book or the practice itself, the book is about the practice of embodying emotions, and the practice of embodying emotions essentially arose from a certain set of personal circumstances and observations. Growing up in India and growing up in a family that was less than optimal in terms of emotional support, and I was traumatized quite a bit, and my emotions were not as available or not as supported. And as a consequence, I lost my body, sense of my body. And so when I came to the West and started to enter psychotherapy, I started to look for modalities that would help me to access my emotions, and access my body as well. And along the way, I realized that I started to get in touch with emotions, but I had a great deal of difficulty tolerating them. Yeah, I found my unconscious shut me down mentally as well as physically. Yeah, so I wanted to find a way, and I found that the emotions were difficult in the body. Yeah, and started to read about emotions. I'm also an academic, so I started to read about emotions, especially the physiology of emotions, and learned that emotions are emotions arise throughout the brain and body physiology, contrary to what people were saying earlier, that it's a brain phenomenon. It's true that emotions can be generated in the brain alone, but it can also be generated in the body. And ultimately, it's unbearable because it's unbearable in the body, not because it's unbearable in the brain. Yeah. So I wanted to find so I became interested in body psychotherapies, that helped me to undo the defenses of the body against emotions, right? But even there, the focus was on expressing the emotion rather than staying with the emotion to develop a capacity of emotion. Along the way, I also became interested in the spiritual quest and of enlightenment that has as its basic requirement the ability to tolerate opposites in the body. Yeah, so all of these things came together, and I explained that in some detail in the introduction to my book. So it's really a personal journey that also became a professional journey, and that's how it is for every therapist. It's not unique. If they actually reflect on themselves, they will find that the modalities that they've chosen or developed have a very close relationship to what their personal needs for personal and professional development are.
Raja, when we say a person is unable to tolerate an emotion, it looks different in the therapist office, right? Sometimes people look so, so the body has different defenses against emotions, right? How ISP can benefit to these clients, for example, very emotional because very limited capacity, or sometimes completely blank, or what?
Yeah, let's take the first case. The person is very emotional. What do they do when they're very emotional? They express it, right?
Yeah.
They're getting rid of the energy and express it, or they cry, right? Or they rage, or they just express it, verbally and get it out. It helps them. They do it. That's one way to do it. But they don't sit with it, right? They don't take the time to, expand it into the body, down into the body, so that they can allow the brain the time to process it. So if I can tolerate an emotion like fear, I can stay with it longer, right? And the longer I can stay with it without reacting to it, the more I give my brain the time to process it for its meaning. Very often you find people start to say, I didn't know that. I thought it always had to do with my relationship. Now I realize that it has to do with a relationship in the past. That comes to them. That's because the brain processes it. It has a time to process it. It's not doing a knee-jerk transference reaction to an unbearable emotion. Yeah. So that's how you do it. So you hold back the expression, you don't block it completely, and then expand it downward. And we have a way of doing it in ISP, that we have models of regulation that we use, an expansion, a physical model of regulation, as well as an energetic model of regulation that works with the quantum level of the body, so that it becomes easier to be with, and we do that. The other case that you talked about is the case of the client who has no access to emotions, right?
Yeah.
What do you do? But even in the case of the client who has a lot of outbursts, the reason why it doesn't go into the body is because the body is blocked, and it can be blocked in so many different ways. And one simple way I can say is constriction.
Yeah.
It's simple as that. And so very often people constrict in the diaphragm, and then the energy doesn't go down below the diaphragm, emotion doesn't go below. And you try to hold this intense emotional energy in half the body. You can imagine the turmoil and the difficulty in tolerating the emotion. So you take it down. You just have them put the hand there. Often we work with self-touch, because the therapies, not many therapists allow therapist touch, right? But no therapy says you cannot ask the client to touch themselves. And it turns out that our own hands are very, very useful when it comes to working with our physiological defenses. For example, even in the brain, I was just working with someone, and with the fear of dying, and very quickly it's gone, right? And this case, and the reason why it goes away quickly is because that person has even a less capacity for emotion. At least the person who's expressing and acting out the emotion has some capacity for emotion. Where the person is completely shutting down, they don't have very little capacity. So you have to regulate the physiology and open it up, and then support the emotion from the outside and relationally, so that you can hold it. For example, just putting your hand here and putting your hand there on the brainstem and the prefrontal cortex can help to open the body and open the brain, regulate it, so that the experience that's pushed away can start to come back to the surface, provided you're paying attention to it and your client is paying attention to it. Yeah.
So people who got this training from all over the world, I know that because we meet in supervisions, and also there are people who took the training in Turkey, talking to them, they are really happy about the outcomes. I'm
really glad to hear.
Yeah. So I am proudly saying this, and we expect to see more people in this training.
Yeah, that would be lovely. And the method is only effective if people who learn it can produce the same outcomes as the person who developed it. This is very important. Otherwise, it's only because of the developer, not because of the method, right? And I'm glad to hear that people are finding it very useful. I think that in Turkey, there's even a greater receptivity to the method. I think it's because the model that we use of the psyche, that's broad enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't only the model we use of the psyche, it doesn't limit itself to the body that goes into the ground at the end of one's life. It also we also use the quantum level body that all religions agree have a longer life than this body that drops dead. Yeah, where considerable defense against emotions can form. And if you have a model for working with that, not only that, we also have because Turkey is a very spiritual country, people want to know, how does it connect? How can you use this method to connect to one's spirituality, to the universe, etc.? Then we also tend to that. So I think it's a combination of these things that in addition to the availability of emotions, Turkish culture has access to emotions, but might have some difficulty, like so many cultures, in what necessarily containing it, because all these culture, it includes the Indian culture, by the way, they're similar. Indian culture and Turkish cultures are similar in that regard. They have access to emotions, but not necessarily the knowledge of how to use the body to create a greater container for the emotions. Yeah. So I think that somehow fits in. So
yeah. And the know-how of the embodiment, it's always talked about embodiment, like in philosophical settings as well, like in existential psychotherapy approaches also talk about it. But the art of the practice of it, how to embody emotions, is actually coming out by your approach, your training, and also your book, right?
Right. And we could, we lay it out in 4 different steps. We say the situation, because emotion is a reaction to a situation. Not just a situation in general, but some aspect of the situation. Some aspect makes me angry, some aspect of the situation makes me sad. So we go for that emotion that the person is having difficulty with. That's the first step, ability to talk about the emotion in the situation in such a way that it evokes the emotion. The practitioner needs to know that, And then the second step is how to elicit the emotional response and support the emotional response, right? And work with the psychological defenses like denial people have against emotion, and to provide the the support that the person needs. The most important aspect of emotional work is the ability to provide support for emotions, on the part of the therapist. Then the third step is where we expand and regulate the emotion in the body. And that's where we work with the energetic defenses. We work with physical defenses using different models. And then the fourth step, which is an optional step, is that where we're looking at the benefits of having done a piece of emotional embodiment work, cognitive benefits, behavioral benefits. Not only that, more basic, physical benefits, expansion, energetic benefits, those things. So those are the 4 steps of the practice of embodying emotions. And in the book, we actually have it laid out. And it turns out that apparently there is an offer by a Turkish publisher, translate it and publish it. And I asked the publisher to contact the 2 of you has she contacted you? So
Not yet.
Not
but
yet.
We are going to look into it. And Raja, besides the book, I mean, it's also, you're so generous in the resources that you provide regarding the training. We have access to the recordings, you do demos during the teaching, we do exercises, and it's really skillfully put together.
Right. And I think it's worth talking about it because it's a 3-module training. It's in 3 4-day modules. And we meet for 6 hours of class time outside of breaks every day. And every day there's theory, there's body sensing, there is a demonstration with one of the class participants. And then there's a practice session, anchored by an assistant, practice under supervision. So it's very important because it's a new paradigm. People need to have an experience of it in their body, through their body. Only then will they become, embodied in the practice. Yeah. And we do that, for 12 days. That's what we do, every day. And it's a packed training, it's a lot of material. And we make the tuition includes the includes free access, lifetime access to the trainings. If it's done on Zoom or in person, we have videos of the training, all the lectures and the demos available for the participant to learn.
Raja, besides all these availability of resources and your state-of-the-art portal and website about it, we also follow you it with the community you provide. You really provide a community feeling with the monthly supervisions that where international participants come together.
Right.
Just last night, I was part of a supervision where we had, difficulties. There were some Russian students, there were some Eastern Bloc students that you provided really support for them. So I wanted to mention the importance of the community. Maybe you want to say more about it?
Absolutely. I mean, support is very important for emotional health. The bigger the community, the better it is. Yeah, and people are suffering, as I said yesterday, on both sides. And we are interested in providing emotional support and to the extent possible, emotional health, so.
And the training is a real experience, like it, as we work with ourselves also, like we know how to work with it, but we also work with ourselves. And personally, I can say it changed me when I took the training. So,
Yeah. I even often invite students for every module to choose a theme that they're struggling with in their lives that involve emotional difficulty. And they stay with it every day, and they often report changes like that. And I'm glad that it helped you. So,
thank you.
Welcome.
It continues helping me, actually.
Wonderful, wonderful to hear.
Thank you, Raja. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
And and we will be together in June.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it, looking forward to it. So,
Sohbetimizi dinleyen herkese teşekkür ediyoruz ve belki de bir kısmınızla Haziran'da görüşmek üzere. Bekliyor olacağız.
Görüşmek üzere.